I almost signed my house over to my nephew. I had the pen in my hand. That morning, my driver of 11 years, a quiet man named Patrick who never once raised his voice in all the time I'd known him, stepped in front of me in the hallway, put his hand gently on my forearm, and said, very low, "Mr. Caldwell, please, don't drink what they gave you. I'm asking you to trust me." I didn't know what to say. I almost laughed. I didn't laugh. My name is Howard Caldwell. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years building a property management company out of nothing. Started with one rental duplex in Kitchener, Ontario, ended up managing over 200 residential units across Waterloo region. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because what almost happened to me could happen to anyone who worked hard, built something, and then made the mistake of believing that blood meant loyalty. My wife, Sandra, passed away 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer. We had no children of our own, something we'd grieved privately for years and then eventually made peace with. Sandra had a sister, Patricia, and Patricia had a son, Trevor. Trevor grew up spending summers with us at our place near Elora. He called me Uncle Howard. He sat at our table at Christmas every year. When Sandra died, he gave the eulogy. He cried. I cried watching him cry. After Sandra was gone, Trevor became the closest thing to family I had left. He was 34, worked in finance, lived in a condo in downtown Guelph with his fiancée, a woman named Simone. She was polished, always put together, always smiling in a way that showed her teeth. I told myself I was being an old man, reading too much into a smile. About 8 months before that morning in the hallway, Trevor started coming around more. He'd call on Sunday evenings, ask how I was managing. He offered to help me with paperwork. I'd been having trouble keeping up with it since Sandra died, and I'd mentioned offhand to Patricia that the filing was getting away from me. Trevor offered to come by and help organize things. I said yes. Of course I said yes. That was the first mistake, not because Trevor helping me was wrong, but because I stopped noticing when the help became something else. He started asking questions about the estate. Gently, the way you ask an old man about his health. Sideways, over coffee. Slipped in between normal conversation. Who was my lawyer? Had I updated my will since Sandra passed? Had I thought about what would happen to the company if something happened to me suddenly? He framed it as care. He said, "I just want to make sure you're protected, Uncle Howard." My company, at that point, had been appraised at roughly $2.3 million. The house in Elora, the one Sandra and I had bought together in 1994, fixed up weekend by weekend, the one where we planted a garden that still comes up every spring, was valued at around $850,000. I had RSPs, a pension, investment accounts. I was not a poor man, and I was alone. I started getting tired in a way I couldn't explain. I've always been healthy. I walk, I watch what I eat, I don't drink much. But around last October, I started waking up with headaches that sat behind my eyes all day. I felt slow. I'd go to say something in a meeting and the word would just not be there. I went to my family doctor at the West Side Clinic in Kitchener, Dr. Fenwick, and she ran blood work and said everything looked normal for my age. She suggested I was probably grieving still, that stress did things to the body we didn't always recognize. I believed her. I was 68 and tired, and I missed my wife. Of course I believed her. Trevor started bringing Simone to the Sunday visits. She'd bring things, a casserole, a box of those butter tarts from the bakery in Fergus that I'd mentioned once liking. She started making tea while Trevor and I talked. Earl Grey, she said, was good for circulation. She always made sure I had my cup. Patrick noticed before I did. Patrick Osei has worked for me since 2013. He started as a maintenance supervisor at one of my rental properties in Cambridge, and when I was looking for someone to help me with driving, I don't like the highway, never have, I offered him the position. He's Ghanaian Canadian, came to Ontario in his 20s, raised 3 kids in Waterloo. He is one of the most methodical, observant people I have ever known. He doesn't speak unless he has something to say. In 11 years, I had never once seen him interfere in anything personal. He told me later that he'd first noticed something was off in November. He'd come to pick me up for a site visit in Cambridge, and Simone had been there, and she'd handed me a travel mug of tea for the drive. He watched her make it, and something about the way she turned her back to the counter, her shoulders, the quickness of it, stayed with him. He didn't say anything that day. He didn't know what he'd seen. He told me he went home that night and thought about it for a long time, and then told himself he was imagining things. But he kept watching. In December, he started making notes. Dates, times, what I'd been given, how I seemed during and after. He showed me the notebook afterward. Neat, small handwriting. 6 weeks of entries. By January, he'd found a website. He's not a tech person. He told me it took him 2 evenings to find it, about heavy metal poisoning. Thallium. He'd typed in my symptoms, the fatigue, the headaches, the word-finding trouble, what I'd described as feeling like my hands were slightly numb in the mornings. He said when he read the symptom list, he sat very still for a long time. He still didn't come to me. He told me he was afraid of being wrong. He was also afraid, and he was honest about this when he told me, of losing his job. He's 61. His youngest daughter is still in university. He said, "Mr. Caldwell, I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong and I say something and they fire me? And then I kept thinking, what if I'm right and I say nothing?" He chose to say something on a Wednesday morning in late January. That was the morning Trevor had called me the night before to say he'd arranged a meeting with a lawyer. Not my lawyer, I should say, but a colleague of his, someone named Bryce, who apparently specialized in estate transitions. Trevor said it was just to explore options. He said it was just so I had information. He said, "No pressure, Uncle Howard." The meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the house. Simone arrived at 8:30. She brought a thermos of what she called her homemade spiced chai. She'd been doing that lately, bringing things in containers from home so I couldn't see what went into them. She poured me a mug and set it on the kitchen table and smiled and said it would warm me up before everyone arrived. Patrick had arrived at 8 to drive me. Even though the meeting was at the house, he'd come to help me organize some documents I needed. He was in the front hallway when he saw Simone pour the mug. He saw her reach into her coat pocket before she poured. He didn't see clearly what she took out, but he saw the motion. He waited until she left the kitchen to go make a phone call. I heard her voice down the hall, talking to Trevor, and then he came to me in the kitchen doorway. He put his hand on my forearm. He said very quietly, "Mr. Caldwell, please don't drink what they gave you. I'm asking you to trust me." I looked at him. I looked at the mug. I looked back at him. There was something in his face I had never seen before. Patrick is a composed man. He was not composed. I put the mug down. I said, "Patrick, tell me." He told me, standing in my kitchen in a low voice while Simone talked on the phone down the hall, everything he'd been watching for 6 weeks. The notes, the website, the symptoms lined up against the date she'd brought things for me to drink. The motion he'd just seen. I felt the floor shift under me. That's the only way I can describe it, not the dramatic kind of shifting. Not panic. The quiet kind, where you realize the ground you thought was solid has been hollow for a long time. When Trevor arrived with the lawyer at 10, I was sitting at the kitchen table. The mug was still there, untouched. I had made a phone call of my own. To my actual lawyer, James Whitfield, at his firm on King Street in Kitchener. James had told me, very calmly, not to sign anything, to keep the mug, to call Waterloo Regional Police non-emergency and tell them I believed I was being poisoned. I had also, and I am still not sure how I was calm enough to do this, poured a small amount from the mug into a glass jar I found under the sink and sealed it with plastic wrap and a rubber band. Patrick's idea. He said we needed to keep it. Trevor came in looking the way he always looked. Easy, confident, jacket pressed. Simone came in behind him, and she looked at the mug on the table, still full, and something crossed her face so quickly I almost missed it. I told Trevor I'd decided not to go ahead with the meeting. I said I wasn't feeling well. I said I needed more time. He pushed back gently, the way he always did. He said Bryce had driven from Hamilton. He said it was just a conversation. I said no. Simone offered to take the mug away, said the chai had probably gone cold. She'd make fresh. I said no. I said I'd take care of it myself. They left. Simone looked at the mug once more from the doorway. The toxicology report took 3 weeks. I had sent the jar, along with a formal statement from Patrick, to Waterloo Regional Police, who escalated it quickly once they understood what they were looking at. Thallium sulfate. present in the chai in a quantity that, over continued consumption and combined with what had presumably been in previous drinks over the past several months, would have caused serious neurological damage. My doctor later told me the cumulative exposure I'd already had was consistent with low-dose chronic poisoning. The fatigue, the headaches, the word finding, all of it made sense now. Trevor and Simone were arrested on a Tuesday in March. I found out from Detective Ruiz when she called me at 7:30 in the morning. I sat in the chair by the window in my kitchen. The same chair I always sit in, the one Sandra used to say was too close to the drafty part of the wall. And I didn't move for a while. Patricia, Trevor's mother, called me that afternoon. She was sobbing. She kept saying she didn't know, please believe her, she didn't know. I do believe her. She didn't know. I do believe her. I believe that completely, and it doesn't make anything simpler. The trial was held at the Waterloo Region Courthouse on Frederick Street in Kitchener, over 4 days in September. I attended every day. I sat in the gallery and I watched Trevor. And there were moments when he looked at me and I tried to find something in his expression, remorse maybe, or at least recognition. I'm not sure what I found. The Crown Prosecutor, a woman named Miss Aji, laid it out methodically. Financial motive was straightforward. Trevor was the primary beneficiary named in my original will, which I had not updated since Sandra's death. The estate transition documents he'd arranged would have, according to financial experts who testified, transferred control of the company to him within 60 days of signing. The lawyer he'd brought to the house, Bryce, turned out to have a prior professional conduct complaint in Ontario. He was not charged, but he was not a clean character. The jury deliberated for just under 8 hours. I know some people find that long, and some find it short. I found it the longest 8 hours of my life. I sat in a coffee shop on King Street with Patrick and my lawyer James, and I drank 3 cups of coffee and said very little. Guilty on both counts. Attempted murder. Administering a noxious substance. The sentencing was 2 months later. Trevor received 9 years. Simone, who the Crown argued had been the primary planner, received 11. I drove home from the courthouse with Patrick. We didn't talk much. Somewhere on the 401 he said, "You know what I kept thinking about? My notebook. I kept thinking, what if I'd waited 1 more week?" I told him I'd thought about that too. He nodded and kept driving. I sold the company in November. I'd thought about it for a long time, whether to keep it going, whether to hire someone to manage it, whether it still made sense. In the end, I realized I'd built it with Sandra for a future we'd planned together, and that future had already changed before any of this happened. I sold it to a local firm based in Cambridge. People I knew had run good properties for years. I got a fair price. I didn't feel the way I thought I would feel. The house in Elora I kept. I'm sitting in it right now. Sandra's garden came up again this spring. Tulips first, then the peonies she was so particular about. I still don't entirely know what I'm doing with them, but I try. Patrick retired in April. His daughter finished her program at the University of Waterloo in the spring. I set up a fund for his retirement. I'm not going to say how much, because Patrick asked me not to, and I respect that. But I will say that I named it in his and Sandra's honor together, because it felt right. He came to the house the day I told him, and he sat in the kitchen and he cried, which I had also never seen, and then he said, "Mr. Caldwell, I just didn't want you to die." And I said, "Patrick, I know you didn't." A few months ago, I was introduced, through a colleague of James's, to a woman named Dr. Myriel Fontaine, who runs a small non-profit based in Hamilton called Safe Harbor, Ontario. They work specifically with older adults who are experiencing financial abuse or exploitation from family members. It's an underfunded, under-discussed problem. Statistics Canada estimates that 1 in 10 Canadian seniors experiences some form of elder abuse, and financial abuse is the most common form. Most of it is never reported. Most of it is never believed. I've started volunteering with them. I go to Hamilton twice a month. I sit with people, usually alone, usually tired, usually embarrassed, and I tell them what happened to me. Not the dramatic version, just the true one. I tell them that the warning sign isn't always a stranger, that the person who offered to help with your paperwork might be the person you need to be careful of, that you're not foolish for having trusted them, that trust is not the mistake. I'm looking into whether there's capacity to set up something similar in the Waterloo region, closer to where I live. There are a lot of seniors here, and not enough of this kind of support. I have time, and I have some resources, and for the first time since Sandra died, honestly, I feel like I have a reason to use both. I have one thing left to say, and I want to say it directly. If you are watching this and something feels wrong, not dramatic, not obvious, just a little off, a little too much help from someone who stands to gain, please pay attention to that feeling. I was a reasonably intelligent man. I ran a company for 30 years. I read contracts for a living, and I missed it completely, until a man who had no obligation to protect me chose to do it anyway. You don't have to be naive to be vulnerable. You just have to be human. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone else is paying attention when you can't. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just the quiet, practical kind of thinking you do when you're sitting alone in a house that almost wasn't yours anymore. Trevor didn't become who he became overnight. I know that now. The greed was there long before Simone, long before the thermos, long before any of it. I think about the choices he made, small ones first, probably, the kind you barely notice making, and how each one made the next one easier. That's the thing about that kind of slow erosion of a person. It doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates quietly until one day the person you thought you knew is standing in your kitchen with a lawyer from Hamilton and a rehearsed smile. And I think about my own choices too. I chose to stop paying attention. I chose to let the help feel like love without asking what was underneath it. I'm not blaming myself for what Trevor and Simone did. That belongs entirely to them, and the courts agreed. But I had softened in my grief, and I had stopped using the same judgment that had served me for 30 years in business. I trusted without watching. That's not a character flaw. It's something that happens to people who have been hurt and are looking, maybe without even knowing it, for someone to lean on. What saved me wasn't luck. It was Patrick paying attention when I wasn't. And Patrick paid attention because he is a person of genuine character. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, not because there was anything in it for him. He kept a notebook for 6 weeks. He went home and researched symptoms on a computer he told me he barely knew how to use. He stood in my hallway and risked everything he had, his job, his income, his daughter's tuition, because he decided that doing the right thing mattered more than protecting himself. That kind of integrity is not common. I don't say that cynically. I say it because I've spent the past year working with seniors at Safe Harbor, Ontario, who had no one like Patrick in their lives. And I see every week what the absence of that kind of person costs. It costs everything. It costs people their homes, their savings, their dignity, sometimes their health. Courage in someone else quite literally saved my life, and I don't think I'll ever stop being grateful for that, or stop feeling the weight of what it means. What I've come to understand is that wisdom isn't something you arrive at. It's something you have to keep choosing. I thought I was wise because I was experienced. I wasn't paying attention to the ways my experience had also made me tired, and lonelier than I admitted, and therefore easier to mislead. Real intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's knowing when you've stopped seeing clearly, and having enough honesty with yourself to admit it. Trevor and Simone will serve their sentences. Patricia carries something she'll carry for the rest of her life, through no fault of her own. Patrick is retired now, and his daughter is working in Waterloo. And Sandra's peonies came up again this spring. What I take from all of it is simple, and I think it's true. The people who do harm almost always take the easy path, one small compromise at a time. And the people who prevent harm almost always take the harder one, quietly, without any guarantee it will matter. Patrick had no guarantee. He did it anyway. That's what I keep coming back to. That's what I try to carry forward.